there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer, I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Before we dive into today's episode, a couple of announcements and reminders. First, thank you so much for your patience as I moved home, meaning moved my home, relocated. Things are settled. Not all the boxes are unpacked yet, but things are settled, and I'm ready to and excited to dive back into podcasting. So thank you for listening to the encore episodes, and be watching for new and different episodes to come. A bit about my new location. You are apt again to hear outside noises. I'm still living within a city, and I will not edit those out. So we're about being real and authentic here, and my life is as real as anyone else's. And so, so that's just wanted to kind of give that heads up. An announcement, the Estranged Heart podcast's first birthday is a week from tomorrow. I can't believe it's been a year. And so I'm super excited to have a special episode that will come out on our first birthday. So be watching and listening for that. And new and different things are coming for the Estranged Heart in 2023. And I'm super excited, honored, and grateful to be on this journey. 2023 is going to be a wonderful year filled with many new experiences and offerings and ways to, hopefully, as is the goal of this podcast and the work that I do as an estrangement and reconciliation coach, and that is to reduce the number of estrangements and increase the number of reconciliations. So, okay, let's dive into today's episode. But first, our quotes, and I have 3 today. The first one is, "Help can be the sunny side of control," by Anne Lamott. The second is, "We don't hear what someone said, we imagine what they mean," and that is by Byron Katie. And the third, "People often say, 'Stop being angry and educate us,' not understanding that the anger is part of the education," and that is by Dentata. Today's episode is titled, "Estrangement isn't always about what you did. Sometimes it's about what was not done." And I will just say at the beginning, this episode is about childhood emotional neglect. And I know that for most of my listeners who are estranged moms, you come from an older generation where the word abuse and neglect are just triggers, and I invite you to please listen to this episode and try to set those triggers aside and listen with an open heart, listen with a sense of curiosity, and give yourself some grace as you're doing that, right? For those estranged adult children who are listening to this episode, I would venture to say that this is probably your reason for estrangement. While it is not everyone's reason for estrangement, I do believe it is in the majority. And for those who are dealing with the quote-unquote gatekeeper issues in estrangement, I invite you to throw the lens of childhood emotional neglect onto that and see where some of the reasons why your estranged child might be entertaining and allowing, quote unquote, and not speaking up and talking back to their significant other about having you in their life. Because we tend to play out roles with our significant others that we had with one of our parents. And that's a whole nother episode, but I just am asking you to please sit with this and listen to it, because it is what I find to be the main reason so many adult children estrange from their parents. So I think it's valuable information, and that's why I'm encouraging you to listen. Again, this is not, it's not a pointing fingers and placing blame and shaming and all of that. It's just to look at this through the lens of curiosity so that we can try to discover what's beneath the surface. Okay, that being said, I want to say, I believe, as I alluded to just a moment ago, that childhood emotional neglect is a significant contributor to the increase in mental health issues today. This is not to place blame, point fingers, or to assign shame to anyone. It's a possible explanation to the crisis we find ourselves in today as a society. And just because we might not like the reason for the crisis does not mean there isn't a crisis. So this is my stance. This is my stance after all of the research I've done, the reading I've done, the talking to experts, talking to mental health providers, and working with all of my coaching clients to include estranged parents and estranged adult children. So more on that as we go. I think, first of all, it's important for us to define the difference between abuse and neglect, because there is a difference, and I think it's important to highlight that. So abuse is typically a willful intent to impose harm or injury. It's the misuse of power, person and trust. It's harming someone or something physically, mentally, sexually, financially, emotionally, that type of thing. Again, generally it comes with that intent, be it a conscious intent or not, it's typically there. It can also be spiritual abuse as well. So neglect is a failure to provide. It's also in not preventing harmful actions. And types of neglect can include physical, educational, medical, and emotional neglect. So what is emotional neglect? It's, according to one of the experts in childhood emotional neglect, and her name is Dr. Janice Webb. And so according to her, and again, she's an expert in childhood emotional neglect is the white space in the family picture, the background rather than the foreground. It is insidious and overlooked while it does its silent damage to people's lives. So, another definition of childhood emotional neglect is the parent's failure to meet their child's emotional needs during the early years. It involves unresponsive, unavailable, and limited emotional interactions between the person and the child. Children's emotional needs for affection, support, and attention or competence are ignored. Childhood emotional neglect also occurs when the parent or primary caregiver exposes the child to extreme domestic violence, allows the child to engage in maladaptive behaviors, refuses to seek treatment for the child's emotional problems, or doesn't provide them with adequate structure. So you might be asking yourself, what are some of these effects, right? Okay, so my kid says that I neglected them emotionally. So what would I look for, right? Some of those, the psychological pieces are, it tends to be, it's the most prevalent in the types of childhood abuse. And I can say that from my own personal experience, that my own therapist has said that this is one of the biggest forms of childhood abuse. And it's typically not dealt with, it's not acknowledged, because it's not seen, right? Again, it's kind of like the whole when we have a mental health issue, that hasn't been acknowledged and dealt with because it's not something that is seen as a physical injury would be with childhood abuse. So someone broke their child's arm or beat them and left bruises and things along those lines. That's something we can all see and we can all go, oh my gosh, that was abuse, right? But emotional neglect and emotionally is not necessarily seen, and therefore not acknowledged, and therefore not quote unquote accepted. When I say accepted, meaning accepted as a form of abuse and therefore treated accordingly. Now, I am here to tell you that do I think that those who emotionally neglect their children need to be thrown in prison and given jail time and a criminal record because of that, as they would with physical, abuse? No. That's my stance on this. I don't think that needs to happen, because I think that if that were to be the case, I think that 8 out of 10 parents on the planet would be in jail. I mean, it's that insidious. We all do it. My mom did it. Her mom did it to her. I'm sure her mom did it to her. I did it with my kids. My kids, while they are breaking the cycle, they're not 100%, right? But they are conscious of it, and they are actively trying to break the generational traumas that come from childhood emotional neglect. So, okay. Despite the lack of overt traumatic events, experiencing emotional neglect as a child can be just as damaging as abuse. In fact, studies indicate that childhood emotional neglect might have the most wide-ranging negative mental health impact among all childhood maltreatment types. It is associated with adverse physical, psychological, and educational outcomes. Individuals raised by neglectful parents tend to have worse mental health outcomes and long-term effects. And again, this could be, in my opinion, why we are seeing an increase, or it's more prevalent, the mental health issues that we have today, and that they're coming to the forefront. A child's perception of neglect is also important here. When a child perceives that they're being neglected emotionally, they are twice as likely to have psychiatric disorders, typically in their teens, by about their mid-teens. And these include depression, bipolar anxiety, panic disorders, phobias, PTSD, and when adolescents with emotions having been neglected, they tend to have poor academic performance, typically enter into some sort of substance abuse, risky sexual behaviors, and suicide attempts. And I will say, again, as I mentioned earlier, emotional neglect is a transgenerational thing. I mean, this is something that's been going on for eons. And when I talk with parents today that are older, from 60s and up, typically, they're like, nobody, quote unquote, babied us when we were little. And when I hear that, I hear no one took care of me emotionally. And our children today are recognizing what actually happened to them, and they're taking active steps to stop it and to break these generational cycles of childhood emotional neglect. Parents who have experienced a lack of nurturing, as I just talked about, they didn't baby us. I think that that's a lack of nurturing in childhood. And if they experience that from their own parents, they tend to adopt similar parenting styles when raising their kids, and hence the generational issue that we have going on. So, what are some signs of emotionally neglectful parents? They tend to speak with a cold and unfriendly tone. They're unresponsive to their child's feelings. So, and when I say unresponsive, that can mean dismissive, right? Like, oh, don't be a baby. Oh, don't, that didn't bother so-and-so. Why it shouldn't bother you, right? Dismissive of their emotions. They don't talk to their children very much. Meaning, when I say talk, we all talk to our kids. Get up and brush your teeth and, make your bed and make sure you do your homework. But are we talking with them, or are we talking at them? Right? And there is a difference. There's a difference in that. They spend little time with the child and make them feel like they're unwanted. They can give much less positive feedback or praise. And again, not necessarily what you say. So some parents are, can be, you're such an ass, or stop being an ass, or you're just being a wuss. It can be just not saying anything. It can be, again, it's not necessarily what you did by quote unquote saying things, certain things. It can be that you just didn't say anything at all. Okay? They can tend to express less affection, show less positive social interactions. And again, this is from the parents. They can disengage and be uninvolved in a child's life. And now there's, I understand there's other reasons for that. If somebody's divorced and things like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a purposeful, I have a work meeting that's going to run until 9:00 tonight, so I can't go to your ball game. And you can't go to the ball game week after week after week after week because you're engaged in work. It's those types of things, right? And again, that's basically you're showing them a lack of interest in their life. And I know that I did that. I did that as a parent. I was not interested in their lives because I didn't get, so from my own childhood, emotional neglect, I didn't get a lot of praise. Where I got my praise from was in school. And so then when I became an adult, moved out of school and moved into jobs and careers, that's where I got my praise from. So I would rather have been at work getting the praise and the accolades and the attagirls there than to be doing the tough work of parenting and showing up for my kid who is going to give themselves praise, right? Because kids naturally do that. And I think that's a fantastic thing today. I didn't think that when I was parenting my children. But because I didn't get parenting atta-girls, I was disinterested in doing things that they wanted to do. So again, maybe not necessarily something I did, but something I did not do. Okay. Also, they persistently find fault with their child. You tend to tell your kid, oh, there you go, you screwed up again, or stop doing that, or all of these things that we think are proper parenting ways to parent and things like that are actually doing more harm than good on the emotional front, right? And again, I get it. I know somebody's going to email me and say, we didn't get handbooks when we came home from the hospital with our baby. And I understand that. I didn't either. I'm in this boat. I am telling you, I have done these things. I have not done these things. I get it. But just the fact that we didn't know doesn't mean we didn't do it. And it doesn't mean that our children were not affected by it. And it doesn't mean that we should just pretend it never happened because we didn't know. I mean, that's not the way to do it. That's not the way to do it. Also, parents can be verbally aggressive, indisciplined. They can ignore a kid's attempts to get help and problem-solving task. They offer no encouragement when a child maybe fails at a particular task. The parent might be addicted to substance misuse. They might show depressive symptoms. And generally, somewhere along the line, they too have suffered emotional neglect from their own childhood. So let's move into some common signs of childhood emotional neglect in children. Many of them have insecure, avoidant attachment patterns, disorganized attachment, and in some extreme cases, attachment disorders. They show passive, withdrawn, and aggressive behavior patterns with their parents. I don't know about you, but did you see any of that with your kids? I know I did. I saw them all. Again, passive or withdrawn or aggressive behavior patterns. Okay? Kids suffer from childhood development delays, in extreme cases, a failure to thrive, negativity during parent-child interactions, and anger towards a parent. That behaviors, people can say, well, I was good to my kid. I didn't abuse my kid, and they're always angry with me, and they've always been that way. They were always an angry child, and they always took it out on me. Okay, I hear what you're saying, and that's not fun, because I too have been there on that end. However, there's a reason for the behavior. And we got to find out what that reason is. And again, I will say it's not generally not it appears to be on the surface. Again, as I normally say, it's generally what's beneath the surface. They can have significantly less positive social interactions. I know that I had that as a kid, and a teen. I was horrible at social interactions of any kind. They can have a delay in language development. They can avoid interactions with other children. So maybe loners, things like that. They have poor peer relationships, disruptive and impulsive behavior, including aggression, hostility, and oppositional. I know, one of the, just like with I mean, it's a mental health disorder that can be diagnosed, and that's oppositional defiance disorder. I don't know, maybe there's some emotional neglect that happened in their lives that caused that disorder to bubble up and rise to the surface. They tend to have low self-esteem and low self-compassion. Some have lower cognitive functioning. They have shame and humiliation and self-blame and feelings of worthlessness. And I want to say something about those two groupings, right? Low self-esteem and self-compassion, and then the shame, humiliation, self-blame, and feelings of worthlessness. Those things is what I see when I hear of gatekeeper stories. That's what I see with the estranged adult child. And again, I am typically picking up on some sort of emotional neglect. And again, I don't sit and tell my clients, shame on you, you were a bad parent, you emotionally neglected your children. I don't do that because I've been in that boat. And shaming somebody is not being productive. That's not going to help anything. I am trying to give people information on why someone might be behaving the way that they are behaving. There are reasons for this. So if your kid is with their significant other and you can point the finger to the significant other and say they're controlling and they have mental health issues and they this and that and the other thing. Well, my question is, why is your child allowing that? Why is your child staying with them? And when I ask those questions, these are the things that generally come up. I tend to see a pattern of low self-esteem with the kid, lack of self-compassion. They beat themselves up all the time. And they have shame and self-blame and, just all of these things. Okay? They can have kids with emotional neglect can have attention problems. I don't know, ADD, anyone? Higher rates of disassociation, more behavioral issues, including conduct disorder symptoms. They have less emotional knowledge and difficult recognizing angry faces, symptoms of depressive disorder, symptoms of anxiety disorder. And in severe cases, children can develop symptoms resembling autism, such as stereotypical rocking and self-soothing. So again, these are things that, doesn't mean that there was 100% emotional neglect if your child has 3 of these things on this list of 20. No, it doesn't. That's not a guarantee. However, if you come at this through a lens of curiosity, it really is helpful. And then to help yourself by finding and connecting with someone, be that a therapist or a coach, who can help you to learn more about this, learn maybe why you may have experienced this as a child and never recognized it, and how you can begin to heal so that you can have compassion for yourself and your child. So that your child can then learn to trust you again. Again, it's not always what you've done. It can be what you didn't do. Did you sit with your child when they came home crying because someone bullied them? Or did you tell them to suck it up? Did you tell your son to man up? Did you tell your daughter, yeah, I'm sure it wasn't quite that bad? Those are all things we do and have done as parents, thinking we're trying to build resilience in our children, when in reality, we're doing more harm than good. What builds a child's confidence is being heard, seen, and validated. And that's what our adult children are asking for. I will have information in the show notes where you can learn more about childhood emotional neglect. And I highly encourage you to delve into this. It's an area that, some estrangement experts dance around the edge of this, but don't really dive into it. And that's okay. That's their journey and their path and their way of working in this estrangement field. However, mine is all about the childhood emotional neglect, because it's what I see over and over and over and over and over and over again with adult children who reach out to me to share their story with me. They tell me, my mom never heard me. My dad never saw me as a person. My dad never saw me as a kid. My dad was never at events. My mom was too busy with my other siblings to show me any attention. It's the emotional stuff that absolutely and utterly wreaks havoc on our lives and our relationships. Be that the relationship with our children, the relationship with our parents, the relationship with friends, coworkers, etc. So I highly, highly encourage you to learn more about childhood emotional neglect. And when you find, as most of us will, that you experience this as a child, I want you to hold your tender little one and give her or him compassion and grace and understanding that you didn't know about this. And then I invite you to hold that same compassion and understanding and grace for your child. So this brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent and that you were able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, or sending an email to me at theestrangedheart@gmail.com. You can also follow us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out via email, again, to theestrangedheart@gmail.com. Until next time.